The M15 is a new thinner and lighter gaming laptop from Alienware, at least compared to their previous models. In this review, we'll take an in-depth look and see just how well it performs and if there are any issues with packing so much power into a smaller machine. These are the specs we're dealing with: a 6-core i7-8750H CPU, 16GB of memory running in dual channel, NVIDIA 1070 Max-Q graphics, 15.6-inch 1080p IPS screen, 256GB NVMe M.2 SSD, and 1TB hard drive. For network connectivity, we've got killer gigabit Ethernet, as well as Wi-Fi version 5 and Bluetooth 5 support. The lid of my model is silver plastic, but it's also available in red. The interior is matte black with a sort of rubberized material. It'll be interesting to see how that holds up longer term. The M15 otherwise felt very well built and had no sharp edges or corners. The dimensions of the M15 are 36.3cm in width, 27.5cm in depth, and 2.1cm in height. And they note that it's 5% thinner and 20% lighter compared to the Alienware 13. The weight is listed as starting at 2.16 kilos on Dell's website, and I found mine to weigh 2.3 kilos, or just over 3 kilos with the 180W power brick and cables included. I've got an AUO 15.6-inch 1080p 60Hz IPS panel, although you've got the option of getting it with a 1080p 144Hz or 4K 60Hz screen instead. No issues at all for me with viewing angles due to the IPS panel, and the side bezels are around 1cm thick, though still a fair bit larger on the top and bottom, with a glossy material that will easily show up dirt and smudges. I've measured the current color gamut using the Spider 5 Pro, and my results returned 96% of sRGB, 68% of NTSC, and 73% of Adobe RGB. So fairly good results for a gaming laptop. At 100% brightness, I measured the panel at 315 nits in the center, and with a 900:1 contrast ratio. Again, not bad for a gaming laptop. Although the 4K panel is rated at 400 nits and with a higher color gamut if you want something better. I've taken a long exposure photo in a dark room as a worst case backlight bleed test, and there was a little picked up by the camera. To my own eyes, this wasn't viewable, but this will vary between laptops and panels. Screen flex was on the lower side while intentionally moving it. The fairly wide hinges towards the center felt quite sturdy. It can't quite be opened up with one finger, as more of the weight seems to be up towards the back. It felt stable on my lap though. Above the display in the center is a 1080p camera. Both the camera and microphone quality are pretty good, definitely above average, although there is a bit of sound picked up even with the fans quiet. The keyboard was okay to type with, and has a 1.4mm travel distance. It wasn't impressive, but it gets the job done. The only thing that annoyed me was the smaller arrow keys, which seem to be typical in Dell and Alienware laptops. The keyboard has zoned RGB backlighting, which can be controlled in 4 separate zones through the Alienware Command Center software, and there are 7 different effects available. We can also control the lighting of the power button in the middle up the back. By default it's blue, and flashes yellow if the laptop is charging. Anyway, back to the keyboard. Here's how typing sounds to give you an idea of what to expect. There was a little keyboard flex while pushing down hard, but overall it felt quite solid. The touchpad uses precision drivers and was very smooth to the touch. It worked fine, but was perhaps a little small. The touchpad clicks down anywhere and has left and right buttons down the bottom. Fingerprints show up fairly easily on the interior, and as some sort of rubberized material, they were a little difficult to wipe off. On the left, there's a Noble lock port, air exhaust vent, gigabit Ethernet port, USB 3.1 Type A port, 3.5mm audio combo jack, and the left speaker. On the right, there's the right speaker, 2 more USB 3.1 Type A ports, and air exhaust vent. The rest of the I/O was on the back. From left to right, there are HDMI 2.0 and mini DisplayPort 1.3 outputs, Type-C Thunderbolt 3 port, Alienware graphics amplifier port, and the power input. I've got the Alienware graphics amplifier here for testing too, and we'll be comparing it with the Thunderbolt eGPU enclosure, so get subscribed for the results in a future video. There's nothing on the front, just smooth plastic. On the lid, there's the Alienware logo in the center, and it's got RGB lighting which can be controlled through the Command Center software, just like the keyboard and power button. Underneath is pretty clean looking, and the rubber feet did an okay job of preventing movement while the air vents are found towards the back. The speaker vents are open both towards the sides and underneath, and they sound pretty good for laptop speakers. Definitely above average and still clear at high volumes. Opening the laptop was easy. Just take out the 9 screws with the Phillips head screwdriver and remove the bottom panel. Inside, from left to right, we've got two M.2 slots, 2.5-inch drive bay, 60 watt-hour battery, 2 memory slots, and the Wi-Fi card above the shared heat pipes. Powering the laptop is that 60 watt-hour battery. However, you've also got the option of upgrading to a larger 90 watt-hour battery too, but you'll lose the 2.5-inch drive bay. With a full charge and just watching YouTube videos with the screen on half brightness, all lighting effects off, and background apps disabled, I was able to use it for 5 hours and 50 minutes. A pretty good result compared to other gaming laptops I've tested, and that's not even with the battery upgrade. While playing The Witcher 3 with medium settings, it was running at 60 FPS on battery. I wasn't able to cap it to 30 FPS like I usually do with Nvidia's battery boost. I had other issues getting GeForce Experience working, which I had to abandon. Despite this, the battery was able to provide a solid 60 FPS for the entire test. But this did mean it only lasted 36 minutes, and it got quite hot while discharging power. I'm sure you could probably get an hour in this test at 30 FPS though. I'll also note that with the 180 watt power brick, in some games I did see the battery start to drain while plugged in. Stephen from Own or Disown mentioned in his review that with a larger power brick this wasn't a problem, so I'm not sure why it comes with the 180 watt brick. Overall, the battery seemed quite good. You could definitely improve battery life on gaming if you're able to get the frame rate properly capped. And of course there's the optional 90 watt hour battery upgrade too, but I think we need a larger power brick. Thermal testing was completed with an ambient room temperature of 25 degrees Celsius. It's worth noting that there are heat pipes shared between processor and graphics, so a change in one component may affect the other. Starting at the bottom of the graph, at idle the temperatures are a little warm, although the fan was completely silent as you'll soon hear. The gaming test was done with Watch Dogs 2, as I find that to use a good amount of combined CPU and GPU resources. And we didn't quite hit sustained CPU throttling while playing this one, as we did in the stress tests, shown by the CPU sitting at 99 degrees Celsius. The stress tests were done by running Ada64 and the Heaven benchmark at the same time, in order to attempt to fully utilize both the processor and graphics. No change in CPU temperature, even with the CPU undervolted by minus 0.12 volts. But we'll see in the next graph how this helped with performance. With my cooling pad in use, I was able to drop the GPU temperature by around 10 degrees Celsius. And with the cooling pad plus CPU undervolt right at the top, we went from constant thermal throttling to intermittent thermal throttling, and for the first time hit power limit throttling instead. I haven't tested with the fans manually maxed out through the Alienware Command Center software, as there was no need. During these tests, it was hot enough that it was always running with 100% fan speed anyway. These are the average clock speeds for the same tests just shown. Down the bottom in the gaming tests, we can see a slight GPU clock speed bump with a 200 MHz overclock applied, but a larger 300 MHz boost to CPU clock speed with a minus 0.12 volt CPU undervolt applied. With the stress tests running, the CPU clock speed rises steadily as we make improvements. With the cooling pad in use, we're getting better results on the CPU compared to undervolting only, as thermal throttling is the enemy here. Then finally at the top, with the combination of cooling pad and CPU undervolt, we're not too far behind the full 3.9 GHz all-core turbo speed of the 8750H in this worst case scenario. These are the clock speeds I got while just running CPU-only stress tests without any GPU load. Even with a CPU-only stress test, there was thermal throttling taking place, which prevented the full 3.9 GHz all-core turbo speed of the i7 8750H. Though we were able to achieve full performance with the minus 0.12 volt undervolt applied to the CPU. These are the temperatures for the same test. So thermal throttling at stock at 99, and then this lowered by 7 degrees Celsius while undervolted, while giving us more performance. To demonstrate how this translates into performance, I've got some Cinebench CPU benchmarks here, with the older 7th gen i7 7700HQ just down the bottom for comparison. Check the card in the top right if you want to see a detailed comparison between these two CPUs. There's no change with or without the CPU undervolt in single core speeds, as that's not enough to cause any throttling. But we can see a 110 point boost in multi-core, due to the thermal throttling being removed while undervolted. Here are the GPU-only clock speeds while under a graphical-only stress test. And with a 200 MHz core overclock applied, we're seeing a 127 MHz improvement, and we'll see how this affects game performance later. With the graphics overclock applied, the temperatures rise by a couple of degrees. And I'll note that this is a fair bit higher than most other graphics-only testing I've done with other laptops, though no thermal throttling in this test. As for the external temperatures where you'll actually be putting your hands, at idle it was in the high 30s in the center of the keyboard. Most others are closer to the 30 mark. While gaming, the center of the keyboard is in the mid-50s, fairly hot for this area, though closer to 40 degrees for the WASD area. And then similar results with the stress tests running. again up to mid-50s towards the back. As for the fan noise produced by the laptop, I'll let you have a listen to some of these tests. At idle, it was completely silent. I used the silent profile, which is why the temperatures were in the 50s. But this does show it can run quieter. While gaming and under stress test, it was actually a little quieter than most other gaming laptops I've tested, despite the fans running at 100%, at least according to Alienware's Control Center software. I feel like the fans should be able to go faster, given the thermal throttling issues we just saw, and considering the fan noise isn't really too loud. It seems like they may have prioritized fan noise over cooling. The M15 gets hot while under load, despite what Alienware's product page says about cooling. There's more thermal throttling here compared to many other laptops with the same specs in similar sizes that I've tested. Finally, let's take a look at some gaming benchmarks. All games run at 1080p with the latest Windows updates and these NVIDIA drivers, the latest Alienware provided at the time of recording. Fortnite was tested with the replay feature, and even at epic settings, I was able to average 100 FPS, and it was playing perfectly fine for me, though much higher frame rates were possible with lower settings. Overwatch was tested playing in the practice range, and once again, very nice results for this well-optimized game. Even epic settings gets us 144 FPS, perfect for a 144Hz panel, with 100 averages for the 1% low. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode and not in multiplayer mode, as it's easier to consistently reproduce the test run. Even with ultra settings, 60 FPS averages were possible in this test. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark, and this test was able to average just under 60 FPS with highest settings, and up to 100 minimum, so should work pretty well. PUBG was tested using the replay feature, and although this is a less optimized game, it still went alright with higher settings. I didn't see too much of a frame rate difference in my test, with 100 FPS just possible at very low settings. CSGO was tested using the Euletical benchmark, and with all settings maxed out, the test was still getting fairly high frame rates, and just able to hit 200 FPS with medium settings, and a bit more at low settings. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the built-in benchmark, and this test always results in high frame rates with modern hardware. Even at ultra settings, we're getting 150 FPS averages, with up to 200 possible at low settings. Far Cry 5 was also tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results were alright from this test. Still above 80 FPS averages even at ultra settings here, with above 100 seen at low settings. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was another that was tested with the built-in benchmark. I was getting fairly normal average frame rates for this game, though the 1% lows were quite poor due to the thermal throttling on the CPU, as discussed earlier. Dota 2 was tested using a fairly intensive replay, so this should be a worst case scenario. These results are not the same as actually playing the game, which would result in higher performance. I did play a quick game with ultra settings just for comparison, and it was averaging around 110 FPS with not much going on. I've got more games covered in the dedicated gaming benchmark video if you're interested. Just check the card in the top right corner. The i7-8750H, GTX 1070 Max-Q, and dual-channel memory configuration are giving us pretty nice results in all games. These were easily playable with high settings at 1080p, despite the high thermals. The M15 is also available with 1060 graphics, so expect different results with different hardware. Now for the benchmarking tools. I've tested Heaven, Valley, and Superposition from Unigine, as well as Firestrike, TimeSpy, and VR Mark from 3D Mark. Just pause the video if you want a detailed look at these results. As we saw earlier, we've got the option of overclocking the graphics and undervolting the CPU to boost performance. So let's see how this actually helps in gaming. Far Cry 5 was retested using the built-in benchmark. The average frame rates at ultra settings was 7.3% better compared to stock speeds, and there was a 7% improvement to 1% low. So we are able to get a decent performance boost from overclocking the graphics and undervolting the CPU, though results will of course vary between game. For storage, I've got a 256GB NVMe M.2 SSD installed, and this was providing very nice read speeds and pretty good write speeds, though this will differ depending on what SSD you get. The 1TB 5400 RPM SSHD on the other hand was a bit lower in this test, considering it should have a faster cache. The M15 has two M.2 slots too, so you can always upgrade with a second M.2 NVMe or SATA drive later. For updated pricing, check the links in the description, as prices will change over time. At the time of recording, in the US with these same specs, it's going for around $2,000. Here in Australia, they seem to only have the 1070 Max-Q version with double the RAM I've got here, which goes for about 3,500 Australian dollars. It'll be interesting to see if prices change with these current Nvidia 10 series models. as the M15 is going to be updated with RTX 20 series graphics from the 29th of January. So get subscribed to see my comparison between this 10 series model with the newer one. So what do you guys think about the Alienware M15 gaming laptop? When I first heard about it, I thought that it was nice that Alienware was coming to the thinner and lighter gaming laptop space. Unfortunately, it looks like this comes at the expense of heat. While this isn't too surprising, other laptops with the same specs and similar form factors I've tested didn't quite get as hot. Thermal throttling was often happening during my testing, resulting in reduced performance. However, as we've seen, we can take some steps to improve this. Otherwise, the M15 felt like a solid premium device that comes for a price as you'd expect from Alienware. It's got decent specs for a gaming machine and in my opinion looks quite nice, aside from the thicker top and bottom screen bezels. The only other issue I had with it personally was the smaller arrow keys that Dell and Alienware tend to use, and I think it would have been nice for them to include a larger power brick to avoid battery drain while gaming. Let me know what you guys thought about the Alienware M15 gaming laptop down in the comments, and leave a like to let me know if you found the review useful. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for future tech videos like this one.